Joining me in the studio right now is Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. AG Nessel, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I want to talk about the lawsuits that you, as well as other attorneys general, have filed across the country against the Trump administration. Why was that important for you to join in on those and initiate some of them?
Well, here's my philosophy. Obviously Donald Trump is the duly elected president of the United States, and he won Michigan, in fact. And with that, it grants him broad powers and authorities to do all kinds of things. But he still has to do it within the confines of the law, right? And so he can advance his policies and his agenda, but he can't do it by violating the Constitution, and he can't do it by violating federal law. And unfortunately, what we've been seeing is a lot of his activities have in fact been illegal. And so my philosophy is this: I understand he was elected to be president of the United States, but I was elected twice to be Attorney General of this state, and my job is to protect the people of the state of Michigan. And so when the president or his executive actors violate the law, and when that violation of the law injures people in our state, I feel as though I'm required to take action. And so we have now on 10 different occasions.
One of the first that you filed was that protection on federal workers because they were being let go from their jobs, and we've seen them being let go from their jobs. Why was it important for you to protect those workers?
Well, firstly, if he wanted to fire people, he could have done it in a different manner that complied with the law. But he simply chose not to. So instead of giving the 60 days notice that is required, and let's be clear as to why that is, when you are firing somebody without cause and without notice, again, which is required under federal law, it means that they don't have the opportunity to find another job so that they don't have to immediately perhaps go on Medicaid or food assistance or some other kind of programming, unemployment insurance. It gives them at least a chance to find something else. But also it hurts the state of Michigan because, of course, now we end up having to pick up the tab for a lot of that. And we also lose the benefit of those government actors and the work they were doing. So we have a lot of cases at the Department of Attorney General where maybe we're working with people from the EPA or from the Federal Trade Commission or from various other places. And then all of a sudden, they're just gone. And it's almost like they just disappeared. We don't get a notice, we don't get a phone call, we don't get an email. It's like whoever we were working with on sometimes a very important case that affects the people of our state, we just don't get notice at all. And we don't know even what happened to them. So, I have a lot of issues with the way that that's happening. It harms our state, it harms those workers, and it's not right.
So when you're working with these people, how does that impact your cases and ultimately the people here in the state of Michigan where there's no worker to go to who knows the history, the background of these cases?
Yeah, it can be really detrimental. And one of the things that we just did is we launched a new portion of our website for people to file complaints in the event that they're having disruptions with their Social Security. So for instance, they laid off, it was over 6,000 people from the Social Security Administration, again, in a totally arbitrary and capricious manner, right? It wasn't with a thorough and exhaustive review as to whether you even needed to have those workers still there to be able to provide people with their Social Security in a prompt manner. They just laid all these people off. And now what we're finding out is that there are a number of people that are having a very difficult time applying for their Social Security, or if there are changes that need to be made, getting those changes made. I talked to somebody the other day who sat on the phone for 5 hours with the Social Security Administration before a live person even answered. When that person got on, they said, well, you have to come in. And, it is going to be really difficult. In fact, I would say catastrophic for people if all of a sudden their Social Security check stops coming. For a lot of people, that's all they have to live on. And so when we're talking about these, this disorganization and chaos that we're seeing right now at the federal level and these disruptions, it has a real world impact on people here in the state of Michigan. And I feel like it's my job to, first of all, monitor what's happening. And when the law is violated and people in Michigan are hurt, to take action. And that's what I've done.
When it comes to that website, will that alleviate any problems in sitting on the phone for 5 hours? Because that's a long time for many people to just sit there and wait for an answer.
Well, what it means is this: it provides us at our department with the information that we need in the event that we need to litigate this. So we need to file a lawsuit. And one of the things that is required is that we have standing to bring a lawsuit. How do we get standing? By identifying concrete, specific harms being done to the residents of our state. So that form really gives me the ability to go to court and say, here are people in Michigan that have been harmed by these policies. And really, I mean, I think many of us can see the writing on the wall. Here you have Elon Musk, who's been tasked with overseeing a lot of these changes, and he's a person who wants to eliminate Social Security altogether. He's made it very, very clear. And it's so offensive because, of course, for all of us, we've spent our entire lives, our entire careers, paying into this system, understanding that that money would come back to us as seniors when we were possibly unable to work any longer. So now to have this unelected billionaire come in and to say, I think this is a Ponzi scheme, and I don't think you deserve your Social Security at all, and I'm going to fire so many people that it makes it nearly impossible to process those checks for you or those distributions. You know, it's really horrific, but that's why I feel as though it's such an important part of my job to then sue the federal government and obtain court orders so that the courts are saying, no, you don't, Social Security Administration. You have to continue, you know, paying out these checks to the people who earn that money.
Do you see your office potentially filing a lawsuit against the Trump administration when it comes to Social Security and the administration of that?
I think it's very possible. I think there are a lot of things that we can sort of see coming. And so, you know, obviously we filed now so many different lawsuits, but they were things that I never thought in my lifetime I would see the federal government do. And one of the worst things I think we've seen happen is really a government that just simply doesn't keep their promises to the people anymore. And what I mean by that is this: we have seen the termination or a pause in funding to so many different essential programs here in Michigan. I'm talking about Medicaid. 2.7 million people rely on that. SNAP benefits, food assistance for over 1.5 million Michiganders. Head Start, our FEMA money for emergencies. Meals on Wheels for seniors. Food banks, I mean, the list goes on. And these are contracts that we have with the federal government. Tomorrow, what do? We pay our taxes, right? Mm-hmm. Over $30 billion that we pay as Michiganders to the federal government. That money comes back to us in the form of essential programming. And for the federal government to say, we're just going to cut off all of these programs that your state residents rely on, and instead that money is going to go to Washington, D.C. so that millionaires and billionaires can get a tax cut, it's just not right and it's not fair.
You talk about those programs. Another program is the libraries.
Yes.
Many libraries are very fearful right now that they are losing funding from the federal government, funding that they rely on. And there's a lot of people in these communities that rely on libraries to apply for jobs, check out books, things like that. What is your office doing about that?
We're suing. Like 75% of all the funding to all our state's libraries comes from the federal government. And now to suddenly say, well, we don't think that's worthwhile anymore, and in fact, we're going to completely disband the agency that oversees that programming. I mean, it's not just that it's morally and ethically wrong. It's also illegal. These are agencies of the federal government that were congressionally created. So you had, just sort of to go back to, our basic civics lessons, you have the, Congress and you have the Senate. They pass legislation to create these agencies and to fund these agencies, and that's signed onto by the president. So it's a congressionally authorized budget in terms of the money, and that agency was created by Congress. The president and his executive officers, they can't just abolish whole federal agencies without approval from Congress. And they can't take all the money that was appropriated by Congress and just say, we've decided that we don't want to pay this money anymore. It's illegal and it's unconstitutional and it violates the separation of powers.
all of these lawsuits, is it costing Michigan taxpayers any kind of money with you filing and joining in on these from across the country?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. In fact, in terms of how much Michigan has had to pay to file these lawsuits, it's been under $3,000 in terms of our costs. How are we doing it? Well, because I have dedicated staff at the Department of Attorney General, and these lawyers, these paralegals, their assistants, they're working 24 hours a day sometimes. Seriously, I mean, I get emails at 1, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning from having, reviewed documents and put together declarations and, submitted pleadings. So we have the exact same staff we had before. It's just they don't really enjoy their weekends or their evenings anymore. But I think it's because they understand the great importance of this and just how devastating all of this would be to our state if we didn't take action.
Michigan Supreme Court made a decision on lifers when it comes to 19 and 20-year-olds and said that they can no longer be charged with a life sentence without the possibility of parole. How is this impacting people in our state and prosecutors in our state?
Right. Well, what the court said is that they can't be sentenced to life without parole without having a special hearing in order to consider whether they should be sentenced to a term of years or life without parole. And I know that might sound good to a lot of people, like, oh yes, they should have that hearing if they never had one before. But, we have some 580 people right now that are serving those sentences in the Michigan Department of Corrections. And I think it's important for people to understand how much time, energy, money, resources goes in to having to dig up files from 30, 40, even 50 years ago. And even worse, it re-traumatizes the victims and their family members. So you now have people who thought, okay, that's over and done with. We had that trial. We did that 20 years ago. And now all of a sudden you're going to have to locate those people and ask them to come back in for these court proceedings. So I think we should be mindful of the way that this affects crime victims and their families, and also the way that it's going to affect prosecutors' offices, the courts, and also, public defenders. All of these parties are going to have to come back again and essentially retry those 580 cases by having these hearings. So it's going to be no easy task, and we're doing it at a time right now where prosecutors' offices are significantly understaffed and they don't have enough money. So it's hard for them to keep up even with the current cases they have, let alone to have to go and revisit those cases from many, many years ago. And again, if you're serving a life sentence, it's because you were convicted of a homicide. So these were really serious crimes.
As we wrap things up here, I know that you have a town hall in Flint and you're going to other cities throughout the week. Why was it important for you to let the people come, ask you questions, and really host this town hall?
Well, we've had all of these really significant disruptions at the federal level, and I think people have significant concerns, rightfully, and they want to talk to their elected officials and ask these questions. For me, I need to explain why we're doing this, and that's what I do. I have a PowerPoint. I go through every single case. I talk about why we're bringing it, what our claims are, what our legal authority is, and then also what the status is of the case right now, so people have a little bit more confidence in where the case is or where it's heading. So that's just part of my job as a public official, to make sure that I'm correctly communicating with all the communities around the state as to what we're doing and what their state government is doing to protect them. And that is really how I see my role. These are all cases, whether you voted for Donald Trump or not, whether you voted for me or not. It's my job to protect the people of the state of Michigan, and that is what I'm trying to do.
Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel, thank you so much for joining me today and talking a little bit about these cases and these lawsuits and everything else as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.